I absolutely love tactical RPGs, despite the fact that they frustrate me beyond belief sometimes. Recently we were kind enough to receive a remake of a game that arguably brought the genre to the West. Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together. One of the earliest entries in a franchise named after Queen songs for some reason. The gameplay is reminiscent of chess. You build your own party comprised of knights, archers, mages, etc., and move them across a grid to attack enemies. As is tradition with most RPGs, the game has a rich story of political intrigue that can rival that of Game of Thrones. It revolves around a recently deceased king and the various people vying for the throne of the King of Valeria. It is currently divided into 3 factions. Backroom, a faction who gets most of their strength via an alliance with the Holy Lotus Empire, the recurring villains of the Ogre Battle franchise. Gargistan, which works in cooperation with the Church in their attempts to gain control. And finally Walsta, the weakest of the 3 and the home of our heroes of this tale. You're put into the shoes of a young rebel named Denim, who surprisingly doesn't wear jeans, who joins the Walsta Liberation Army to avenge his father and destroyed hometown. As time goes on, Denim rises through the ranks to become its leader. Accompanying him on his journey are his sister Kashua, who has a frightening obsession with him, and his best friend Vice, at least for a little while. The game features branching paths where your decisions dictate what stages you go to and which people join your party, as well as which of the game's 3 endings you'll receive. That's as far as I'm going to go with the story, because not only would this video become ridiculously long, I wouldn't dare want to ruin it from prospective players, as it's integral to the game's enjoyment. Now let's not kid ourselves, this is a niche genre. The last thing I want to do is seem like a snob, but if you're not a total fan of this type of gameplay, you need not apply. It's very slow-paced, more so than a typical turn-based RPG, or even an RTS, yet slightly faster than a game of chess. It's the kind of game that if your dad saw you playing it, he'd rather watch paint dry while adding it to the list of the many things he's disappointed in you for. Positioning is a huge factor in combat. You have to take into account terrain types, elevation, even the direction you're facing at the end of your turn. Obviously, you're the most vulnerable from behind, and more likely to dodge or block from the front. Higher elevation is beneficial to ranged units, but line of sight for arrows and magic spells can be broken by the environment, or even your own troops. You need to constantly be thinking 2 moves ahead, especially since the enemy almost always starts with the high ground in an advantageous position, whereas you always start in a vulnerable cluster. All these hurdles just make that victory screen unbelievably satisfying. The game starts out relatively easy, but that difficulty spikes real quick. This is especially true when you have to fight consecutive battles. Grinding does help, but the permadeath system made losing units very painful. Hero unit losses, except for Denim, whose death results in an immediate game over, were especially brutal because you would miss out on any future story interactions as well. The remake added something called Union Level, which is an arbitrary level cap imposed by the game at certain points in the story to prevent you from over-leveling, which is just awful. Whoever thought it was a good idea needs to be fired. Now all the footage I've been using is from the Reborn version that recently dropped for modern consoles, which itself is based on the PSP remake, which is based on the PS1 port of the Super Famicom original. And unlike some series, I think it got better with each version. The PS1 to PSP jump was definitely the biggest, as it introduced new artwork and voice acting. However, Reborn has a few quality of life improvements. For example, you're able to preview maps before you fight and save pre-made lineups. Speaking of previews, you can now preview the trajectory of magic and projectiles to prevent friendly fire. Battle cards are an entirely new random pop-up on the battlefield that give you and your opponent buffs and debuffs, which can turn the table in battles. You now get 3 turns to revive downed characters, a la Final Fantasy Tactics, before they are lost forever. They also eliminate the 3rd resource called TP and just make all the skills in the game use MP, which makes it much easier to build your characters. And to top it all off, no more random encounters. There are training battles which you can choose to do whenever you want instead. These are just a few of the more noticeable features making this remake a superior one. If you're a fan of the series or a potential newcomer who might have been turned off by the difficulty, like young Meeb does, then this could be a good place to start. Tactics Ogre Reborn is a lot more forgiving than the original, especially with the ability to rewind turns, but it still offers a stiff enough challenge for series vets or for people who mistakenly think this was the re-release of a Queen album.